Welcome to the October 7th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Berman.
Present.
Commissioner Campbell.
Here.
Vice Chair Rubenstein.
Here.
Commissioner Niblin.
Here.
Commissioner Big Stick.
Present.
Commissioner Campbell, would you lead us in the salute to the flag?
Certainly.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
On to the approval of the order of agenda. There, have a motion? Commissioner Niblin,
I'll move approval.
Commissioner Berman.
I second the motion.
Okay, please vote.
No, no worries. We're a little different tonight.
Oh. Oh, got it. Okay.
Where did you?
I was going to vote yes anyway. It works.
Sorry about that.
No, it works. Recalibrating.
Next is the designation of a liaison to the City Council meeting, August 14th, 2019, the Marymount Appeal.
Yes, so there was a typo. It's the October 14th appeal, October 14th City Council meeting where they'll be hearing an appeal of the Marymount rent increase. So we do need a liaison, and although he could not be here tonight, Chair Clifford wanted to offer his himself to do that, but it's up to the will of the commission who they appoint.
Yeah, if there are no other volunteers.
Being the other commissioner that attended the site walk with Tom, I'm in support of him attending.
I was just going to echo my agreement with that.
Okay, I don't think we need to vote, so we'll just designate Tom as the liaison. Okay, on to oral communications.
Chair, if I could interrupt, we
Yep.
need to entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
Oh, sorry, yes. Let me clear that. Do I have a motion?
Yes, I'll move approval of the minutes.
Commissioner Berman?
I second the motion.
Okay, please vote. Okay, on to oral communications. This portion of the agenda is available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission that is not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. If there's nobody interested in speaking to that, we'll move on to consent items. First up is consent item CDP 411-19, Emergency Coastal Development Permit CDP 411-19, filed by the applicant Dinesh Pereira for demolition of an existing single-family residence located at 2205 Palmetto Avenue.
I'd like to move approval of the consent agenda.
Commissioner Campbell?
I'll second that.
Okay, please vote. Alrighty, we're going to start with new public hearings tonight. First up is PSD 818-17, construction of a 1,398 square foot, two-story, single-family residence on an existing 2,250 square foot non-conforming lot, an exemption from the two-car garage off-street parking standard for single-family residences by providing one or two uncovered off-street parking spaces on a vacant lot known as Lot 37 of Block 1. Recommended CEQA action, Class 3 categorical exemption. Recommended action is approved as conditioned. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Commissioners. I'm Senior Planner Christian Murdoch. The item before you relates to reconsideration of development permits for construction of a single-family residence with a parking exception on an undeveloped lot on Salata Avenue in West Sharp Park. The Planning Commission approved this project and recommended City Council enactment of a general plan amendment and rezoning on July 15th. Following the Planning Commission's approval, an appeal of the Planning Commission's action was filed, which led to a hearing by the City Council on September 9th. At the appeal hearing, the applicant indicated he was able to create a second driveway parking space in response to some of the neighborhood concerns. The City Council expressed interest in this alternative design and referred the project back to the Planning Commission for further study and consideration of this alternative. The City Council at the same meeting introduced an ordinance to change the site's general plan and local coastal program land use designations to high-density residential and the site's zoning to R3 multiple family residential. The council adopted that ordinance on September 23rd, 2019. The proposed single-family residence would have approximately 1,400 square feet of floor area, 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and would measure approximately 23.5 feet tall. The project would include a detached shed and additional area accessed on the left of the building for storage. The alternative design proposed by the applicant on September 9th would provide 2 off-street parking spaces provided in a driveway and would preserve as much property frontage for on-street parking as possible. The project site is an existing lot measuring 25 feet wide and 90 feet deep with a lot area of 2,250 square feet. It is one of 4 similarly situated lots which are contiguous along this portion of Salata Avenue, but which have 3 different owners. This lot is 50% narrower, 10% shallower, and less than 50% of the lot area of a standard conforming lot. The existing substandard conditions of the lot have presented unique challenges to its development as outlined in the Planning Commission staff report from July 15th, including but not limited to difficulty achieving full compliance with off-street and on-street parking standards, and difficulty arriving at an architectural design which is consistent with the design guidelines. The applicant's proposal has gained staff's recommendation of approval because it is a reasonable compromise which balances the various competing zoning provisions which are difficult or unfeasible to satisfy on the site due to its narrowness and small size, and because the project results in a pleasing design aesthetic which is consistent with the traditional character of the West Sharp Park neighborhood, which consists of small cottages. The applicant's revision to provide 2 off-street parking spaces also responds to the main concern of many commenters on the project who believed a single-family residence should provide 2 off-street parking spaces. For the reasons specified in the staff report and summarized this evening, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approves the requested development permits, including the parking exception, which would enable construction of a single-family residence on the subject site. Any action to approve the development permits would take effect only upon future certification of an amendment to the city's local coastal program by the California Coastal Commission to incorporate the ordinance adopted by City Council on September 23rd. Staff's available to answer any of the Commission's questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Bigsick.
Thank you. So under normal conditions, there would need to be a 2-car garage for the residents, correct?
That's correct.
So my question is, when thinking in terms of a 2-car garage, is that just a 2-car garage or a 2-car garage with the driveway spaces one normally sees leading up to a garage?
If we're talking about all of the applicable zoning standards, it would be a 2-car side-by-side garage plus a 20-foot front setback from the front property line to the face of the garage.
So under normal circumstances, we're talking about a driveway along with a garage?
Correct.
Okay. Another question I had, some of the, at least one of the letters we got mentioned something about a historic district. So I'm wondering in general what it means that there's a residence within the context of a historic district, and specifically if that pertains to this particular lot.
Sure. I think we've tried to figure out more information about what these references have been to a historic district. We are not aware of any adopted historic district which would change the city's land use regulations or zoning standards or require some other process for review of projects. We do understand that there was a neighborhood group that studied some of these issues and may have made certain recommendations in the past, but so far as staff has been able to uncover thus far, we're not aware of any regulatory effect of those recommendations which may have been adopted by the city.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Berman?
Yeah, I know that we received some public comment or letters about the new parking depth. And when I was looking at the plans, it appeared to me that it's 18 feet from the edge of the patio to the property line, and then there's 2 or 3 feet between the property line and the back of sidewalk. Is that correct?
I believe that to be correct. The specific dimensions, I'm not sure about, but
Sure.
certainly there's some distance between the front property line and the sidewalk.
Okay, and then are we making the assumption that if a car were to be parked, let's say in the middle of that parking spot, and were to slightly overhang the property line but not impede on the public sidewalk, is that typically acceptable of the city? So it doesn't block the sidewalk?
Right, right, I understand the question. I'm trying to think of any applicable zoning standard which might be directly violated by that. Certainly, we don't want to allow obstructions of the sidewalk, which I think you indicated in your example would not be the case. Beyond that, I think we would likely hope that the parking would occur entirely within the driveway because the city's public right-of-way is not intended for parking in this fashion. But I'm not aware of an immediate enforcement activity which would be undertaken.
Okay. So given that no specific city requirement or code kind of doesn't allow that, then the concern of an 18-foot deep driveway wouldn't, it's not necessarily 18 feet deep, it's kind of, as long as it's not blocking the sidewalk, is typically acceptable.
Well, I think from a practical standpoint, you're correct that it would look and feel like the driveway. There's no line on the ground that will be present to delineate between the private property and the public right-of-way. My statement earlier about violations, I'm not aware of any zoning violations that would be immediately implicated. There could be other provisions of the municipal code. Typically, occupancy in the public right-of-way outside of the normal course of transportation would require an encroachment permit. So that's one example of where, upon further analysis, some provision of the municipal code could be violated. However, I'd also maybe like to draw your attention to the design of the home. It's actually the covered front porch that's in the front that has another 4 feet of depth between the end of the driveway as it's currently designed and the face of the house. So the commission could consider ensuring that the design of that porch would allow the overhang of a longer than ordinary vehicle, as well as perhaps another way to push the parking more into the private property rather than with the tail, if you will, out into the public right-of-way.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Can you explain to me the rationale behind a non-conforming lot having smaller setbacks than a conforming, a standard-sized lot? It just seems a little counterintuitive.
So I'd say, as a general matter, there's only one setback which would be different in this case, and that's the side setback. The zoning says that for lots of less than 50 feet in width, the side setback shall be 10% of the lot width, or 3 feet, whichever is greater. In this case, at 25 feet, the side setback would be at the minimum of 3 feet. Beyond that, there's no additional allowance for the setbacks to be different. If I'm understanding what you're asking, perhaps it's drawing attention to the front setback. So the front setback in this case would be 15 feet to the front of the structure and 20 feet to the front of the garage. Since there's no garage, the applicable setback is 15 feet. And so if that's what you were alluding to, it's not because the property is non-conforming, it's because the structure that's proposed does not have a garage.
Okay, thanks. And the reason I asked is speaking with folks in, a couple folks in Rockaway and Valamar, we have a lot of non-conforming lots. There's been a lot of houses going up where people are surprised at the setbacks, very large homes, very small setbacks.
Sure. In that context, there may be different applicable setbacks. Those are R1 zoned sites in Rockaway, primarily. This being a site approved for R3 zoning, and the analysis being predicated on that, there's no such allowance. There is a separate set of non-conforming zoning regulations applicable to the R1 zone only that does provide for different setbacks. I would not generally characterize them as less restrictive. In some cases, they're more restrictive in the sense that they're intended to arrive at a design that does not require discretionary review. So in some cases, they have to push second stories farther back from the front property line is one example. So yes, there is a different set of regulations that you might be referring to in those other cases.
Thank you. Thanks for the explanation.
If there are no other questions, I'll invite the applicant to come up, and you have 10 minutes to describe your project.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Brian Brinkman, part of the applicant team. Thank you for your time tonight. Just recap what Christian already said. We went to the appeal at the City Council. They adopted the general plan amendment and zoning amendment. And really the main discussion or item that came up was that we presented the potential for a second driveway spot at that meeting, and based on the public's concern and the City Council's desire to see that out, they send us back to you here tonight. There's no change in the house proposed. The setbacks that you were just discussing about the driveway are all still the same. We do have the 18-foot driveway and 3 feet to the property line to the sidewalk, so there is more than the standard 20-foot there for parking. Other than that, if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to invite the public to speak at this point. I have some cards up here. First card is from Zach V. Just please state your full name for the record.
Hi, my name is Zachary Vickers. I live at 71 Salada, and I was made aware of this proposal from my neighbors. I'm new to the neighborhood, and I've already encountered some parking issues on the street. I think that this new proposal sounds okay, especially if they're able to park 2 cars in the lot. But I think that we really need to pay attention to what space is allotted on the street for street parking, seeing as how that's a high impact area close to the beach boulevard. And I think that the proposal should take that into account. Thank you.
Next invited to speak is Mike McCarty.
Good evening. It's Mike McCarthy, and thanks for having us in here tonight. You know, my concern certainly is also with the parking on the street and having access to it. What I've seen in the new proposal appears to accommodate that. One of our concerns when we got the new proposal with the 18 feet was thinking that only small cars could park in such a spot. So I'm encouraged to hear that there's extra space of the extra 3 feet that can be used, though we haven't seen what those details look like, if it's really accessible or not. You know, kind of my other concerns just in general with the whole neighborhood is the quality of building that we are seeing going up, especially from the applicant. He does a very good job in our neighborhood. I'm very pleased to see the structures that he's built. But I would say it's probably something that would hit in the historic spot, of which I heard tonight has not been officially adopted by the City Council, so I'm a little concerned about that. But what I am concerned about moving forward is these sheer walls that are going up in our neighborhood. We should have a little bit of a perspective and look at it from an architectural standpoint. So I encourage you, the Planning Commission, to look at that. We don't have an architectural review board, and you guys are really what we have to look at that right now. Proposals of having things that are 4 stories are very concerning for our densely populated neighborhood here. It doesn't fit with the character of our neighborhood. So, you know, think about that. I would like to go back and explore the historic designation of Sharp Park. To my knowledge, as a resident here and seeing all the signage, which I believe was given up by the city, there had been some type of official recognition of this Sharp Park being a historic neighborhood. And we need to look further and to make sure, if there is no designation, that with the Sharp Park specific plan that's being proposed now, that we do look at that and make sure that we are having some type of verbiage in there to as far as what the look and shape of our community should be, not only from a commercial standpoint, but also from a residential standpoint. Thank you.
Kevin O'Rourke, please.
Hello, good evening. So I live right across the street from the project, and the parking there is already a bit of a nightmare, and there is potentially 4 houses that are really going in on the lot across the street. There's 4 separate lots, and I think the other developers are here and ready to go. They're just waiting to see what's happening with this one. And I think the current setup that they have now, the curb cut isn't very wide, so if there's somebody on either side parked right up as far as they can on the curb cut, then you can't put 2 cars in that spot that they've designed now. And also, the whole reason that we're not putting a garage in is supposedly for aesthetics, and now we have 2 cars in the front yard, which I think isn't appealing to me. I don't know. I mean, to me, the most logical setup would be at least a single-car garage, then you have one inside and one behind it. And so that's all I have to say. The parking situation is bad. We're the one that's going to have to live with it, not anybody here on this panel. And I hope that you listen to the people who will be living with it. Thank you.
Cindy Abbott.
I am Cindy Abbott. At the July 15th Planning Commission meeting, our neighborhood spoke out about the concerns with the proposed development. Legitimate concerns were expressed about how the application of zoning was being manipulated to accommodate development on the small 2,250 square foot lot and about inadequate parking. City Council recognized both of those concerns. While they recently approved the zoning change, they also requested planning consider a new zoning designation to come up during the general plan process of small lot residential. And they granted the appeal in part for further analysis of this revised parking plan. While that parking plan is appreciated to incorporate 2 on-site parking spaces and looked at how to manage the curb cuts with the adjacent vacant lots, it's still going to create a significant impact on the neighborhood. The parking requirement for this lot is 2 garage spaces per unit and a guest space where adequate driveway length for a parked car doesn't exist or street parking isn't available. While the staff report states that it provides 2 driveway spaces and that parking on the street is available, that's not true today. You can't park there now when there's no curb cuts at all. Parking in West Sharp Park, as I've stated before, has long been a problem. The 1980 local coastal plan notes that and says that we should ensure that there's adequate parking in the neighborhood. The 1990 design guidelines state that more off-street parking than required by zoning ordinance should be provided to allow ample space for guest parking. So while this revised plan provides a second uncovered spot, it's unknown that that unusual configuration is actually going to accommodate 2 cars and allow access for passengers to get in and out. The initial plan for this property in 2017 had a garage, a covered parking space, and an additional on-site guest parking spot. That continues to be the best plan for the neighborhood. Approximately 7 vehicles currently park in front of that undeveloped the 4 lots. The proposed project, along with the development of the adjacent lots, has the potential of adding 8 to 12 new vehicles to the neighborhood while displacing at minimum 4. Where are those extra 12 to 16 cars going to go? There's already no space there today. This project is pushing cars up onto Palmetto, and Palmetto's pushing cars back into our neighborhood. Please consider holding on this project or adding appropriate 3 spaces to the project. Thank you.
I'll invite the applicant to come back up if he wants to speak to any of the comments that were raised by the public. You have 5 minutes.
I don't really have much to say on that. Points were brought up on the housing and if all 4 lots were developed and the additional cars that could be there, but the numbers given didn't factor in that there's actually going to be parking on those sites to offset at least some of that. And any development that you do, you're putting a driveway, you're taking away a spot on the on the street. So it's not applicable just to this project. It's a common item through any development. Other than that, that's it.
Okay, great. Oh,
Question?
yeah, we have some questions for you.
We had a comment made that the previous plan had parking, more parking than this plan. Was there a reason for the change, or can you talk about that?
The original one, we talked about this the last hearing, but there was issues with the density, the lot density, and that's why we went through the whole general plan amendment and zoning amendment. And we worked with planning extensively, trying to come up with the best concept for lots of that size. And that's how we came to the driveway parking and eliminating the garage and creating the storage structure in the back to provide the storage space that would typically be found in the garage.
Great, thanks for the explanation.
Yeah, so as I was reading through it, it looks like the plan, in theory, is coordinating with the other lots to maintain basically 3 on-street parking spaces, if I...
Yeah, as part of doing this, we took another look at, hey, if these 4 lots also develop, we thought maybe we should explore if our driveway should be on the other side to best coordinate all that. But then we laid it out this way, and the way we could push it up to one side and have one curb cut for 2 lots seemed like the optimal.
Sure, and I appreciate the effort made. The question is, has there actually been coordination with the other lot owners, or is this just, we've set this up in such a way that if they want to align with us, it would likely work out for the benefit of all?
We have shown it to them, and they're grateful for that. They haven't come up with a design or anything for their projects yet, but I believe they were in agreement with how we had our driveway laid out.
Okay, so kind of a tacit coordination, but it's not concrete yet, is what I hear?
Well, they haven't gotten to the point where they've designed their development yet. So we've shown it. They were in agreement that that was the best spot to coordinate with whatever they might do. And, we've presented to the city, and they planning staff thought the same as well.
So far, you've gotten an oral agreement from the other landowners?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I'll bring it back to the commission for deliberation. Commissioner Campbell.
Just a question for staff. Are the adjoining landowners in any sort of preliminary planning for the other 3 lots?
Preliminary planning is probably a fair way to describe it. They've approached staff for feedback on general development themes or key considerations so that they could take that into account. Is hopefully they lay out a design for some or all of the 3 remaining lots that would be most palatable to the neighborhood and supported by the city. They've not yet submitted an application for any of the lots, however.
Great, thanks. Just my preliminary thought, and I don't remember the parking being as front and center in the last meeting, and I'm thankful for the public for bringing it up, but it does seem that maybe there's a too much going on for that small lot. I know that I've got friends and neighbors who've remodeled who would have loved to have gotten rid of their garage for aesthetic reasons and didn't get to. So it seems a little, I don't know, unfair to the rest of us who've got to keep our garages. But I'm going to just look forward to comments from the fellow commissioners.
Commissioner Bigsick?
Yeah, before I give my comments on parking, if you could flesh out for me just a little bit more the original 3 spots that were in the plan for 2017. I heard it last time, but it was a while ago now, and I heard the explanation a moment ago, but Could you just maybe flesh it out for me a little bit more so I more fully understand what the problem was with that plan?
There was a prior proposal, I think, submitted based on a misunderstanding by the applicant that those non-conforming zoning provisions, which I described to Commissioner Campbell earlier in the hearing, the incorrect belief that those applied to this site, they do not. And so upon learning that, we explored alternatives which staff thought would better balance design guidelines consistency with parking requirements and the variety of zoning requirements that we have to attempt to apply to sites, but which are designed for sites with 50 feet in width and 5,000 square feet in site area. So as you start running down the list, some of those are difficult, if not impossible, to apply. The two-car garage requirement, we believed, was one of those, and that's why the applicant sought a parking exception. That prior proposal had a one-car garage and a one-car carport, which essentially had half of the frontage with the garage, the other half carved out to allow the depth for a carport to project in. Essentially, the second story of the residence served as the carport. And so it was our assessment that that was not a desirable architectural design, and since the zoning did not require it to be constructed, we pursued alternatives with the applicant, evaluated a redesign that we thought better reflected the cottage aesthetic of the historical single-family residences in the Sharp Park neighborhood. And I mean historical as in the older, more original form, not necessarily quote-unquote historical structures, but those that existed, for many decades preceding the development that's proposed here.
Did the applicant change the architecture of the house itself once that original parking configuration was deemed not desirable?
I would say it was a drastic redesign of the project. It oriented it again down to the street level, oriented it to the pedestrian scale rather than chopping up the frontage of the house for a carport underneath the second story of the home, and the remainder of the frontage being a garage. The entry to the home in that other configuration was at the back of the carport, which again de-emphasizes the entrance from the street, hides it, makes it just an awkward architectural design in my assessment. And so we were relieved, I think, to be able to consider an alternative design to the one that would have been required if this was an R1 zone site.
Okay, so at the last meeting, when it was just one spot on and then off-street parking, my main concern was the idea that if you have a three-bedroom house, conceivably that means you're going to need 3 cars. And there just being a driveway, that was a very hard sell for me. And I could easily see that congesting the parking situation to a place where I did not want to vote for it. And then my question tonight, because now that I've had time to think about it a little bit more deeply, I just wanted that further, if it were taken in the way it's supposed to be, what would that look like, which essentially is no fewer than 4 spots on site under worst-case scenario conditions. But again, my original concern was if there's 3 bedrooms, 3 cars, 1 driveway is not going to cut it. If there was a garage, if I squint, then at least there's 2 spots on the property itself and then an on-street spot. With the reconfiguration that's been brought here, there's 2 spots on premises and then 1 on-street parking spot, so that satisfied my initial concern when this first came up. When I walked that area, and that entire lot was filled with cars parked in front of it, the entire frontage. And there was a comment earlier that you can't park there, but everyone's parking there right now. It brought out ideas, because one of them was an RV, so that connects to a much larger conversation we're having that doesn't really pertain here, but I can easily see how doing this will take away street parking for, say, a visitor, which concerns me. On the other hand, I was happy that a compromise was made in such a way that my initial concern of 3 spots for 3 bedrooms was taken into account. I was somewhat heartened that a couple residents of the neighborhood were glad that at least that extra spot was brought in to ease the congestion that otherwise, to my mind, I couldn't vote for the first time. So again, I'm kind of caught in this middle space. I'm leaning a little bit more this time toward voting yes, although I think Commissioner Campbell makes possibly a persuasive argument why it could be pushed over the other edge again in the interest of fairness, character of the neighborhood, and it would be nice to see it fleshed out in a proper neighborhood plan. Right now, I'm leaning toward voting in favor of it because that accommodation has been met, but I'd be interested to hear the rest of the thoughts of the commission.
Commissioner Niblin?
Thank you. And, I do appreciate the comments that have been raised, and I also appreciate the attempt that's been made by the developer and various other stakeholders who've brought sort of this parking issue to the fore. I think that the staff report's recommendation is a reasonable way of balancing what is kind of a challenging situation. I mean, there's a small lot, it's constrained, it's certainly being treated differently from other lots that are bigger, but that's sort of in the nature of sort of the discretionary things that we're doing here. Sometimes different results in order to allow feasibly property to be developed. And, my own take on it, I recognize parking is extremely challenging, and it's actually become, even in some other parts of the city as well, places where I didn't think we'd have issues, starting to become an issue even up on Laurie Lane, where we've always had, reasonably abundant parking. It's not as abundant as it used to be, so I certainly am conscious of the issue. I don't know that it's necessarily, though, the burden that ought to be borne by a particular property owner to account for every single bit of street parking in the context of trying to develop their lot. I mean, people should be able to develop their lots, notwithstanding that it might take some curb away. I mean, that's just in the nature of needing something you need in order to develop, recognizing that we do need to assure adequate parking. This is a small house as well. I recognize this is remind myself, something like 1,400 square feet. It's not a massive house. I think that 2 vehicles under the circumstances is acceptable. I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah, I would like to say that I'm also comfortable with the project, understanding there are impacts in the neighborhood when a new property is developed, and that one of those impacts is parking and traffic and other issues. But, as a neighborhood, we have to accommodate for those concerns when we can, and in this case, I think it's a sensible development for the site. Commissioner Campbell. Oh, Berman, sorry.
I agree with the rest of the commission. I'm in favor of approving the project. I'm ready to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'll just go on record as saying I do think that there could have been a smaller house here. As someone who lived in about 1,000 square foot house in the back of Bellamar for a while, it can be done. So I'm sensitive to the fact that you want to make sure a person has the right to develop their property into a home, but there are ways to do it. And there's some really nice cottages that have been built on small lots in town. So I don't think we'd be necessarily stripping anyone of their property rights. And I'm a little concerned about the precedent regarding parking. It's definitely a livability issue for folks living in town these days, and so livable communities is important, I think. So I'll be voting against it.
Would you like to make your motion?
Sure.
Yep.
I move that the Planning Commission finds the project is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, adopts the resolution included as Attachment A to the staff report to approve Site Development Permit PSD 818-17, Coastal Development Permit CDP 387-17, Use Permit UP 116-19, and Parking Exception PE 174-17, subject to conditions of approval in Exhibit A of the resolution, and incorporates all maps and testimony into the record by reference.
I'll second the motion. Please vote. Okay, congratulations, you have an approved project. Next on the agenda is CAP-11-18, Cannabis Activity Permit to establish a medicinal and adult use cannabis retail operation at 1726 Palmetto Avenue. Recommended CEQA action is Class 1 categorical exemption, and recommended action is approve as conditioned. Staff report, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Helen Gannon, Assistant Planner. The item before you is the 6th cannabis activity permit to be considered by the Planning Commission under the city's cannabis business program enacted in 2017. If approved, it would be the final retail operation allowable under the city's zoning. The Cannabis Activity Permit, or CAP, was formerly referred to as a Marijuana Use Permit, or MUP. The city's program consists of 3 phases of review. Phase 1, a background check investigation. Phase 2, a security plan review, are both processed by the police department. Phase 3 is the current and final phase, which requires Planning Commission approval of a cannabis activity permit. Planning Department staff work closely with the police chief throughout Phase 3 to carefully review this application against the requirements in the municipal code. The application before you would be for a medicinal and adult use sales cannabis retail operation at 1726 Palmetto Avenue. The operation would be located within the Sharp Park Overlay District and would be the 3rd approved cannabis retail operation within this overlay district. The site currently contains 1 single-family residential structure. The footprint of the existing structure will not be altered. However, the applicant does propose a new interior floor plan. The entrance will open to the lobby, which would include a reception desk and a small customer waiting area. The lobby leads into the main showroom area, which would be the cannabis dispensing area and would include a countertop and display shelves. The remainder of the floor plan consists of office space, storage space, a small break room, and a restroom. The proposed operation would be open daily from 9 a.m. until 9 p.m. Parking will be provided on-site, and the applicant will provide a security guard on-site during all business hours. Part of the security guard's duty would be to discourage loitering, monitor the parking lot, screen visitors, and monitor site surveillance. Video surveillance will be provided throughout the exterior and interior of the structure to ensure all areas are under camera coverage. This includes the exterior surveillance of the detached garage at the rear of the site, which will not be utilized by the proposed cannabis retail operation. In conclusion, staff recommends the Planning Commission find the project exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act and adopt the attached resolution to approve Cannabis Activity Permit CAP-11-18, subject to provide conditions of approval. Staff is available for any questions.
Any questions for staff? Okay, I will invite the applicant up to talk about their project. You have 10 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Crystal Matter, and I represent Adam Zollinger. This is Adam, and this is Tim. Tim is here to provide any questions you have regarding the construction of the project, and as identified, he will be helping with the management of the business, as will Adam. Consistent with what the assistant planner stated, we'd like to go over a brief overview of the operations as well as the security plan, and then answer any questions that you have. We are seeking to obtain a medical and adult use permit. We intend on hiring a local and diverse group of employees. We anticipate 10 to 16 employees will be hired. The type of products that will be offered will be flower, pre-roll extracts, edibles, tinctures, and topicals. What we're looking to do is provide safe access to quality products. Details of the operation, as the assistant planner mentioned, we intend to be operational 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and there will be auditing throughout the day, but specifically at the beginning of operations and at the close of operations. And specifically what I mean is we have a system whereby the products will be taken out of the vault at the rear of the property and be brought to the front of the property every morning. So what that allows us to do is store these products safely, but also allow for at least two periods during the day in which the product will be audited. In addition to that, we will have, at the beginning of each shift, there will be the tills will be counted out, $200 in cash, $20 in change, and at the end of each shift, that will be counted. The customers will enter through the front of the entrance, and then they will wait in the lobby. According to our plan, we intend to have various customer service associates. There will be 2 customers per customer service associate. And the reason for that is twofold. One, we want to be able to best help the customers find what they're looking for, but also as an additional safety precaution to make sure we don't have too many people on the sales floor at one time. Next, with respect to transport, we will only be purchasing products from licensed distributors. And when those distributors arrive, they will be coming through the rear of the property, which is gated. They will arrive in, we will review the manifest, we will go over the delivery, check the quantity, the packaging, and the licensing, and then that product will be taken inside through the rear. We will also be offering delivery to residents throughout the greater community here. Ideally, what we'd like is for residents to come into the dispensary the first time and start a profile. And in creating that profile, we'll be able to take a look at their license and get payment information. But we do understand that some people have limited mobility, so we want to take that into consideration. Our main focus is security and making sure that cash doesn't exchange hands. So when people call or place internet orders, we do take payment at that time. That way there isn't any cash exchanging hands with the driver. Also, the driver will be making deliveries only during the operational hours that you all approve, and what we're hoping for is 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., which we believe has been approved for the other dispensaries in town. In addition to that, we would also like to be an eco-conscious business. So we intend to plant drought-resistant plants, also have separate receptacles for waste as well as recycling. We would also like to use to order reusable supplies rather than single-use supplies where possible, utilize LED lights, digital displays in order to replace paper menus. Also, to the extent that food waste can be composted, we'd like to compost that either in the yard or take it to a local garden. We also understand that odors may be a concern of nearby residents, so we do have an odor mitigation plan. In addition to that, we would like to reiterate that everything is packaged, so this isn't a cultivation site where you have to worry about large amounts of odors, but we do understand that it may be a concern, so our plan also identifies that we intend to create an odor observer committee, which is really just taking nearby residents and providing information saying, hey, if you have a concern, please reach out to us so that we can ameliorate that concern as soon as humanly possible. We do realize that security is a big concern. Our security officers will participate in those audits in the morning and in the evening. They will also be monitoring the parking lot and doing sweeps in the morning and the evening. The security officer will also be responsible for validating IDs to make sure that we don't have any minors that are trying to access products. We also do understand that this property does have a little bit of a bad history with the neighborhood as being known as a drug den. And we understand that there have been some residents that have at least expressed some concern about the fact that a dispensary may be going in this location. And number one, we do want to reiterate that this building, this residence, is under new ownership. And to the best of our knowledge, there have been no complaints since Mr. Barba took possession of this property. Also, we would also like to reiterate we will not be utilizing the garage. We understand that in the past there have been issues with use of the garage for, methamphetamines or whatever it is, but Mr. Barba will be using the garage really just to store real estate materials. So that will not be a leased space for the dispensary. So whatever happened in the past is something that we really want to make sure won't happen in the future, and really want to alleviate any of those concerns. We also understand that the community has raised concerns regarding access to minors, and we want to repeat that in addition to the lobby area as well as the checking IDs, we will make sure that that will never be a concern that any of the commission members, the city council, or the residents have to be concerned about in terms of providing access to the minors. And lastly, we understand that there have been some concerns about prior dispensaries in town providing access to illegal products, and Adam has never run a dispensary in this town, illegal or otherwise, and I brought him up here to make sure that if you guys have any questions, that you can raise those to Adam and feel confident at who you are approving to run a dispensary at this location. And that's all I have.
Any questions? Yeah, go for it.
Will your dispensary be selling vaping products?
As of right now, yes. We understand that there are some local concerns that are being looked into by various other states. We will, of course, gladly comply with any regulations that come down regarding vaping products, but we would like to stress that we are providing safe access to products, and there are many other products on the market, such as the pre-rolls and the tinctures and the topicals, that I have identified that, that we would be providing to the public under safe circumstances.
Okay, so you, go ahead.
Are-
I'm done for now.
Okay. In regards to your delivery service, I was wondering, do you plan to have the requirement of actually handing the package to someone of adequate age? Or I just want to make sure, especially similar to alcohol delivery, that when you receive a wine shipment, it's not left on our doorstep for the teenagers to grab. So similar concerns with this.
Absolutely, and what our hope is that people will actually come in and initially create that profile so that we can take a look at that license and create the payment method. But regardless of whether they create that initial profile, every single delivery will require looking at that ID and verifying that the person who is receiving the product is of age and is the person that appears on that license.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to invite some folks from the public to speak. I have two cards, one for Mike McCarthy.
Hello again. So here we are. Hats off to Pacifica for becoming the first city in San Mateo County to be able to sell cannabis. It's pretty revolutionary. But our friends down in Lindemar didn't want dispensaries in Pedro Point or back in the valley for concerns of concerns of the community. So now we're faced with having 3 here in Sharp Park. Seems like it's a little bit close where all 3 of these are at. If you look at what other cities have done, they're typically more in industrial type areas. Look down in San Jose, even in San Francisco, they're more outwards away from residential areas. It's pretty dense where we live right now. This will be our 3rd one within 2 blocks of each other. There's a lot of foot traffic around there, a lot of children, very close to the school, to IBL, the middle school kids, the ones who are like the most influential at that time to be kind of brought over to drugs. You have the resource center right across the street. There's a bus stop right there. There's a restaurant across the street where I see middle school kids going all the time. I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the security in our neighborhood. On my street, on Salada, we used to have a cannabis dispensary at the end of our street, and I can't tell you how many times people were driving down our street the wrong way. They would double park in front of neighbors' homes. They would park in front of people's driveways while they were trying to go and access the cannabis from the cellar. We even had one instance where I saw some guys doing bong loads in a driveway across the street from, directly across the street from the dispensary. It was just ridiculous, especially just being half a block from the beach. We've even seen other people who are defecating in the neighbors' yards. The lady who lived just to the east of the former dispensary. So nowhere in what I see today in the security proposal from the applicant does it even talk about anything about the community. There's a very large lot across the street. There's going to be traffic going down Santa Maria towards Beach Boulevard, and we've seen an increased amount of traffic with the new dispensaries down here at the end of Montecito. I think one of my neighbors was mentioning the other night that she saw 15 vehicles coming and going, and they're all going in different directions, flipping U-turns. So I have concerns about the security of the neighborhoods. I really encourage you to think deeply about that and maybe shift it further up Palmetto. Thank you.
Next speaker is Colleen Golden.
Hello, I'm Colleen Golden. I am probably one of the closest homeowners to the dispensary. So my concerns include parking, proximity to our middle and high schools, a change in architecture in the neighborhood, because that ramp that they're putting in, the vacant lot that's right next door, in addition to the one that Mike mentioned, and that garage space. So, as stated by the people that are going to open or want to open, the Little Red House was home to known drug dealers for years, and the city did not help. So we hope the city will consider that now, and if it does go in, to listen to the neighborhood. We also want to confirm that the garage is not being used. Finally, there's a vacant lot right next door to it, and if a fence could be put up there, because that whole fence has gone up in flames twice when the meth lab blew up, so if we could just put a gate so no one can go in that vacant lot, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, I'll invite the applicants to come back up to speak about any comments that they heard.
In an effort to save paper, I put 2 and 3 on my slip. I was hoping this would be exactly.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Sorry about that. I didn't realize I needed to use 2 slips. But so again, Zachary Vickers, new resident of the neighborhood, and I'm just concerned about this becoming a cannabis corridor. There's already 2 dispensaries. I see kids all day, every day, up and down that street, outside of school hours. They should be at school. But they walk up and down that block. I think that this is going to be creating a strong precedent that, they should start their lives with pot because they're seeing adults using it every day, buying it at these stores while they're waiting for their bus on the lot. And I think that we need to think about what that's showing for our neighborhood, what that's showing to our kids if we're going to continue to put these in there. I don't know what the benefit is to the city to have 3 in such a dense neighborhood. I mean, we can think about Eureka Square. There's some empty lots there. Maybe just move it to another location because it's going to be a real blight on our neighborhood. I work in the city. I go by, dispensaries there in the city, and that's does not create a good impression on the neighborhood if you have them up and down a street. They're spread out. I don't know why there needs to be 3 and 3 blocks, or I guess it's like 3 and 4 blocks. So I think that just think about that. If this was your community, if you had kids growing up, I plan on having kids running up and down the yard or up and down the street there, and I'd rather not them get the idea that they should be, buying pot as often as possible. So that's just what I'd like you guys to think about. Thank you.
Hey, thanks. If there are no other cards, I'll invite the applicants to come back up.
So there were a few concerns that we heard, architecture, security, and kids. First, I'd like to point out the number of CAPs is consistent with the approval in May 2019 from the City Council. As far as the architecture, what we did is we looked at the surrounding buildings and we picked paint colors that were consistent with the other buildings that we saw. There's no major change to the front of the facade of the building, so the intention is for it to blend in as much as possible with the existing architecture. In terms of security, we understand, as stated before, that this property does have a history, and this is an incredibly regulated market in terms of cannabis. And in addition to our rigorous security plan, we're confident that we can turn a once blighted home and an eyesore into a prosperous cannabis business. In terms of the issue related to kids, I'm sensitive to the fact that there may be kids in the neighborhood and kids may walk by, but we have a security plan that makes sure that there will be no loitering, and that's specifically why we have a waiting area inside, is to make sure that nobody makes it from the outside inside that shouldn't be in there and is of age. And in addition to that, we have a secondary check in there to make sure that there's nobody gaining any access to the building or to any product that could fall into the hands of children. So we would like to invite the community that if they have any concerns regarding security or access to children, to reach out to us so that we can ameliorate any of those concerns. I think as far as the cannabis culture of yesteryear, where everybody thinks that it's going to be a blight on the community, is changing rapidly. When you look at the dispensaries that have popped up around California, they are really, really nice establishments that people can go into, and there isn't the situations, at least not what we intend to do, where people are defecating in public. And so we really just invite people to contact us if they have any concerns of anything that's going around, whether it be our establishment or anyone else's, so that we can remedy those as soon as possible.
Yep. Stick around for some questions, please.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do have a concern. And it's the, you know, you've seen it in the news, that's the vaping with the cannabis, and they're finding, I think San Francisco actually has its health department on this, but they're finding that the aerosols mixed with the CBD it's causing deaths and injuries. So I'm just kind of curious, are you going to continue to sell those types of vaping products in your store?
I knew that this question would come up. If it didn't come up from the public, I knew it would come up from the commission. What I'd like to put into context for all of you is the fact that vaping and cannabis has been around for 8 to 10 years. And what you've seen recently is a very small, concentrated stint of illnesses and injuries. That doesn't make it any less worse. But right now, what the agencies are trying to figure out is what is causing that. I have my own opinions. I think, you know, in part, we need to make sure that we are doing as much as we can to regulate the industry and to make sure there's no black market intrusion into the industry. But again, in terms of vaping products, if they find out that vaping products are causing this, or that there needs to be some sort of a ban on vaping products, even temporarily, we would, of course, comply with that. But I'd say right now, in terms of the history of cannabis and vaping being 9 to 10 years and seeing just a very small fraction, I'd say that it's more likely than not that you have a bad batch than you have a really serious problem, because you aren't seeing a much wider spread issue. But that's my own personal opinion. We'll be happy to comply with any ban or measure that the state and the local government feels necessary.
Commissioner Niblin?
Thank you. A couple questions, and I guess part of it, I was trying to get a sense of the aesthetics. I sometimes run up and down Palmetto, and I get a chance to sort of look as I'm running past it, kind of the way some of the dispensaries are set up. And I'm sort of curious about, one is sort of signage, because I am concerned about the aesthetics. And I'm sort of curious about, it looks to me like what we're proposing is a wooden sign that identifies a CB1 co-side. Is that exactly what we're talking about it saying?
Yes.
So it doesn't really actually even say dispensary or
Correct.
THC, get your pot here, or anything like that?
Correct.
How big's the sign?
We can pull the plans from the back.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to look at it myself. I was just sort of curious about rough order of magnitude. I mean, give me a sense.
Probably 2 feet wide, foot tall.
Uh-huh. And what can be seen from the street as you're walking past, you know, inside the windows? Could you sort of give me a general sense of what you have in mind, or what I might expect to see as I'm walking past from the outside, if I was just I don't know, a middle school kid, or just somebody who maybe, you know, doesn't want to see, you know, the commerce that's going on the inside?
Well, given the proximity from the street to the windows, and that the windows sit up, you will not be able to see a great deal from the street. And the idea, too, behind taking the inventory at the end of the day and putting it in the back is kind of like when you have a jewelry store.
Yeah.
So that people can't actually see that there are any products. There wouldn't be any products right up against the front window, if that's what you're asking.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at. Is if I'm walking past, I'm not interested in the business, or I just assume not.
Right.
You know, sort of be exposed to it. It's one of those situations where I really have to sort of strain to see it. I'm just trying to get, that was really what I was
We're
trying to get my brain around.
contemplating that front lobby area where people will be waiting to be escorted onto the sales floor, so it would be very difficult to see product from the street level.
Okay, thanks. One other question then relates to, you know, you should never trust somebody when they say one other question, but another question I have pertains to parking, and I see that we're looking at 5 parking spaces on site. How many spaces do you suppose are going to be needed for business operations, specifically employees or maybe a delivery driver? I mean, how many of those spaces are actually going to be available for customers?
The delivery truck would be parked in the rear, so that wouldn't be taking up any spaces. And I would anticipate that employees would be parked farther away from the building to maximize parking for customers.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No more questions for you. Thank you. I'll bring it back to the commission for deliberation now. Commissioner Bigsick.
Question for the chief. There was this idea brought up by at least one of the speakers that somehow there was a defecation incident connected in the proximity of Surefire. I've been around many stoned people in my life, and not once have I personally witnessed something directly connected with cannabis usage. Perhaps you have some insight if there was a call into that incident, or perhaps incidents, if it was a common occurrence at the time.
I'm aware of no calls of that nature. Actually, we usually attribute that to alcohol, not cannabis. The gentleman's comment about that was the first I've heard of that.
Okay. And then I have a question for staff. My understanding is a big chunk of the reason why, well, for example, one of the speakers mentioned the Lindemar area as being a place that wasn't necessarily receptive toward a business. However, my understanding is you take a spot like the Lindemar Shopping Center, which is owned by Kimco, that's not necessarily a decision made by the people in the area so much as the business organization that doesn't necessarily have any residents in Pacifica whatsoever aside from their buildings being here. And my understanding in changing the ordinance to allow for 3 businesses in the overlay district was that simply it was difficult to find people to rent to the businesses, not necessarily that the community as a whole had a particular issue. Am I more or less accurate with that analysis?
I think I would say it was my sense that the city council had a desire for 6 retail operations to open in town, and they heard reports from prospective operators experiencing difficulty finding eligible locations, particularly those that were zoned within the overlay district and that had receptive property owners. And so to use the Lindemar area as an example, that overlay district encompasses the Lindemar Shopping Center, as well as the Pedro Point Shopping Center and 2 or 3 independent parcels on the south side of San Pedro Avenue along the lines of, I think, Castle Kitchen and Ace Hardware. So among those, Kimco, as we understand it, is not open to authorizing cannabis businesses on its property. The Pedro Point Shopping Center, for whatever reason, no applications have come in for that site. And the one site that did generate an application in the Lindemar Overlay District, the property owners subsequently withdrew their authorization. And so I would say the council was probably reacting in large part to the fact that it wanted 6 retail operations, but they were not materializing based on the combination of zoning and property ownership as it exists today.
Okay. And then a final comment. As somebody who grew up in a household in which cannabis use was prevalent, long before it was legal, and I literally had a parent whom from a very early age would, albeit in a joking fashion, offer me the joint from which that parent was currently taking puffs. I did not attempt, but that's the kind of household I grew up in. And I know people who absolutely were smoking cannabis from an age earlier than they should have been. I know several people. I know some people who did this and in conjunction with other things that were readily available in their household. It was not a good situation for them to be in. And I dare say for other folk, it also wasn't a good situation, but they turned out just fine by it. What worries me much more than putting 3 cannabis businesses in close proximity is the idea of keeping it unregulated. And not having enough regulated businesses so that there can be a prevalent black market offering to children. Because a great way of getting rid of people who are selling it illegally is to have a lot of it legally sold. Because if the illegal market is being undercut, then the odds of your children buying it directly start dropping. Especially in a world in which alcohol is as prevalent as it is. I would imagine you can just go to Raymond's for a beer, and it's inexcusable if an adult is misusing a product and offering it to a minor. But I think that in terms of odds of it falling into a minor's hands, the odds are going to be much better of it not falling into a minor's hands if whatever business is going on is regulated and above board than if we leave every opportunity available for those whom are doing it illegally. And that's my opinion on that. Thank you.
Commissioner Campbell?
I'm aware of the 600-foot buffer that's required from lot line to lot line between a school and a cannabis retail operation. This facility is like a hairbreadth away from the lot line for the school. So was there, I mean, we're talking just a few feet, it seems like. Was there any attempt to contact Ingrid B. Lacey Middle School or the Pacifica School District on behalf of the city?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Any reason why not? I mean, just considering the proximity? Was there any thought on that or discussion?
Well, the city council had a very thoughtful process for identifying the appropriate locations for zoning for cannabis retail operations, and I don't think staff felt we're in a position to second guess the council's decision in that regard. Moreover, we send notices to a 500-foot radius, which is significantly more than the 300-foot radius required by state law. The school district's property is even beyond that. And I think in addition, there's just no direct evidence that these types of uses present any direct adverse impact to the children that may wander by at various times of the day.
There's no evidence of that?
Not indicated from our police chief, not indicated by others that have had an opportunity to comment on this. They've speculated and there's fears, but I think it's our take that this is a lawful regulated land use that the city council determined to be appropriate, subject to review for a variety of factors. And so there was just no evidence to cause us to go outside of the boundaries that have been prescribed.
So I was just reading in the 2000, well, in the ordinance 9-4.4805, one of the reasons for denial of a cannabis activity would be if the proposed location of the cannabis operation is not likely to have a potentially wait a second. Criteria for issuance. The proposed location of the cannabis operation is not likely to have a potentially adverse effect on the health, peace, or safety of persons due to the cannabis operation's proposed proximity to a school, daycare center, youth center, public park, playground, recreational center, school bus stop, or premises frequented by children, religious establishment, or other similar uses. So I was just looking, we got a comment about the bus stop, and there is the IBL, there's a bus stop in front of IBL school that's within the 600-foot buffer. So I would think, that's kind of the genesis of my question, you think there's actually a bus stop very close to this cannabis operation that the IBL kids use. So the IBL kids are just milling about. And this is also a safe space to walk route that IBL has designated. So there's a lot of kids walking up and down in front of this establishment. We've heard about safety being a primary concern of the applicant, it seems like. Did that was that discussed or addressed? Did I miss it in the planning report?
Sure. That's a very different scenario, more proximate gathering places for children than the school that's beyond the 600-foot radius. So I think it's absolutely important to consider that in light of the finding that you pointed us to. With that said, again, we're not aware of any evidence that's been presented of what hazard or adverse effect these types of uses would have on children. Should there be evidence, we absolutely should consider it, but considering they're walking by, we have no indication that that could adversely affect children. With respect to the bus stop, should it function in the way you described where children are congregating when the business is in operation? Absolutely, that should be considered. In the case of the particular bus stop that's directly across the street, it's only in service in the AM hours according to Samtrans, and it's only a pickup location in the morning. And so the hours of operation as proposed by the applicant and supported by staff, they begin at 9 a.m. and the drop-off, or excuse me, the pickup at that site occurs no later than 8:44 a.m. And so we did not see a likely operational overlap that required any further analysis in this case.
And is that true for the bus stop that's in front of IBL?
The bus stop in front of IBL is on the same line, and it has the same hours as far as I could ascertain from Samtrans.
That's funny. I see a lot of kids on that bus, but
You know, I think it may go the other direction in the PM hour to take children back home, but it's not looping by, according to Samtrans, in front of this operation.
And then just one more, thank you. There's the Pacifica Resource Center basically across the street. Were they contacted or? Yeah,
Yes, I actually spoke to Nita Reese myself regarding this, asked her what her thoughts, or if she had any opposition to this project. She did not. I had explained to her that there may have been concern from the public voice regarding children going into the resource center, and Ms. Reese told me that it was more commonplace that adults would go into the resource center alone, and if they went into the resource center with children, it was obviously because they had small children with them, and they were supervised and accompanied by a parent. So in terms of there being children being present and that having an adverse effect on the resource center, she did not have any concern.
Okay, thank you for that. Last thing, parking. We heard about an issue with, we've been talking about parking, and it looks like the facility might have 6 to 12, probably in shifts, so let's say 6 folks, and there's a 5 space allotment. Are we concerned about parking? It looks like what the applicant said is that the employees would find parking in the neighborhood. And we've already just heard about how the neighborhood is pretty impacted.
Yeah, with the Pacifica Municipal Code, by standard, they're only required to actually offer 4 parking spaces. They will be offering 5 parking spaces, so that was not a concern that was raised by us, at least, in this case.
Thank you.
Commissioner Berman.
My questions are extremely similar to Commissioner Campbell's, and frankly, I'm concerned with the proximity to schools and bus stops and children's whereabouts. My question's for the Chief of Police, and maybe this just kind of elevates the conversation that we just had. Given the other cannabis selling institutes in the area, or maybe even your research and expertise from other cities, are there issues that have been reported involving youth, or what are possible issues that the police department may come across, or the residents may come across?
Well, the main issues we're concerned from a law enforcement aspect would be addressed by an appropriate security plan. We're worried about what we looked into when we were talking about how, when we created this ordinance, talking about what would be in a security plan, how these businesses would operate to address the issues. We were worried about robberies. We were worried about access to the product by minors. We looked at how, and in my research, looked at how these businesses were developing, not only in our state, but how they developed in other states, especially Colorado, talking to consultants. And we realized that these businesses, once legalized, were becoming commonplace. They weren't the underground or even the out in the open, unregulated businesses that we had seen in Pacifica in the past. With the proper security plan, checking identification, the youth really don't have any access to the product if the businesses are conducting their checks as they should be, which we will be from time to time assuring that that's occurring. You know, and as the chief in my mind said, it's not really much different than a place that sells alcohol. Is the business being responsible with how they're conducting their business and keeping away from the youth? They're going to walk by. Are the children going to know, especially the middle school and the high school kids, are they going to know what's in there? Of course they are. What I've seen from other communities, it really isn't any difference, again, than perhaps a place where they sell alcohol. The children are going to walk by, they know what's in there. Heck, even in those places, they go in and they can see it. Whereas in the cannabis businesses, they cannot. With the regulations we have in place, if a business becomes a bad actor, if you will, and they're not following the rules, they're not following what's set out in their security plan, we have the ability to take action, which is why the public safety license has to be renewed every year. Gives us the opportunity to look into these matters if there are complaints, or if they're doing something they shouldn't that's affecting the community adversely. We could opt, if we have enough, to pull their public safety license if they're in violation. And as you know, if that public safety license is pulled, then their cannabis use permit becomes, or cannabis activity permit becomes invalid. So I think these are all legitimate concerns. All legitimate concerns that can be mitigated with a business that's operating as our code is designed for them to operate.
Thank you. And so given that, it sounds like the applicant has a very thorough security plan and put a lot of thought into keeping the product safe. What's kind of your take on it? As well as, I know recently we had Seaweed Holistic come to us, and I know you attended as well. I think this was an atypical situation, but there was a specific regulation plan with regular site visits. Is that going to be applied here? Is that applied elsewhere in the Sharp Park area?
Are you speaking of the inspections?
Yeah, the inspections.
Yes, we're going to be conducting inspections of every one of the cannabis businesses. The difference between this one and that one was because of some of the issues we discussed at that meeting. They were going to be unannounced. We had the authority to do that. Whereas this one, we would, as with any other business that didn't have that specific restriction, we do plan on going in. We have a consultant we are working with that will assist us with these inspections, and we will be doing two things in those inspections. One, making sure that they are in compliance and holding businesses accountable that are not in compliance with local and state law, but we'll be also using it as an educational tool for less serious violations, should they need to up their game, if you will, a little bit to come into compliance, to help them to be good business players in our community.
Okay. And from your opinion, just reviewing the applicant's proposal, the safety plan, what's your opinion on it?
I was okay. I approved it. I was okay. I think that they have the safety and security of the facility in place. They have a plan in place to assure that underage folks don't have access to the product.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell, I see your light.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, one of the things that troubles me just about the 3 versus 2 is that when this was before us, when we were coming up with the actual ordinance, you know, we talked about how many to have in this commercial area, and we decided on 2, and that decision was basically overturned by the council later and made 3. And I thought, I just think it's incredibly unfair and burdensome on this particular neighborhood to have 3, because they're bearing, you know, we just had kind of this rationale, actually. They're bearing the burden of the fact that the rest of the city can't come up with a way to house one of these facilities and spread them out. And kind of like we were talking about the homeowner in the last matter we had we were saying, well, that's unfair for him to bear the burden of the parking problem that is in that area. Well, here it's unfair, I think, for this neighborhood to be bearing the burden of a citywide problem. And, yes, cannabis operations are having trouble probably finding places to rent, but that doesn't mean that Sharp Park gets slammed and gets turned into, a neighborhood that has a lot of these, maybe more than the citizens want. So that's my thinking on it. It's just, again, it's not fair, I think, to the neighborhood. And I think for that reason, as well as parking and as well as proximity to the school and kind of advertising this to the middle schoolers, basically, I just can't see a way through it for me to vote for this.
I don't disagree with you in many of your comments. I think it's unfortunate we don't get to cherry pick the best operators, and it's sort of the order of the applications that come in dictate, who gets approved and then what the density issues now we face, right? Because 3 in this district in such close proximity to each other and to the school seems like a lot to me as well. This operator actually seems pretty well presented, and
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, the
so
operator
it's-
sounds
we've seen
great.
others that not so much. So, yeah, I just throw that out as my comment.
Thank you. A couple thoughts. One is that, we actually do have, if my count's correct, 6 total licenses, and I think 3 are in Rockaway, so it's not that the entire city is, placed all of these in one place. I frankly, as a starting proposition, this wouldn't have been, as a policy matter, my first choice, frankly, in the abstract. Having said it, the people of the city were very clear on what they want as a policy matter. The city council's been pretty clear, and I think the regulations are such that, what we've got in front of us is something that is within the buffers that are set forth in the regulation, and frankly, within the count that is authorized by the regulation. And looking at the particular layout here, it's a discrete business, more discrete than most restaurants, or liquor stores or 7-Elevens, what have you. So it is, there are some potential impacts. Clearly, parking is one that continues to concern me a little bit, so I have a question, and maybe for, I guess, for staff. And it really pertains to, I'm trying to think through, sort of traffic demand or parking demand management that we might be able to sort of impose on this project, if there's any way to. Again, I was a little clear on, that we're talking about some significant number of employees, which I think is great. Local hiring, I think, is good, and creating catalysts for jobs is a good thing. I'm sort of curious about, and maybe I missed it in the report, and so I apologize, how many employees we look to have on site at any given time. And then are there things that we could do to condition the project such, or this application such, that we're assuring that employees aren't unduly burdening the limited parking that's actually available in the community, in the immediate vicinity of the project?
Yeah, we'll try to reach back to the figure on the number of employees, unless the...
Sorry, just found it. An average of 6 employees on shift per
Okay.
per day.
So I think that perhaps, the most direct method to address that is to consider the maximum number per shift. I think there's limited opportunity for the city to regulate where those employees park.
I see.
Even if parking was available, they could choose to park wherever they would like.
Okay.
That would be a difficult enforcement matter for us.
So, but it's a practical matter enforcing it, and then just the ability to tie it as a nexus to the application itself, I guess. Is that what we're?
Well, I think if the nexus issue could be explored further. I think my comments were relating initially to the ability to enforce any
I
such
see.
condition specifying where employees would be required to park.
Mhm.
I think, as I mentioned, the most direct way to get at the likely parking demand from the employees would be to limit the number per shift, hopefully not below some number that the police chief felt was appropriate for security at the site,
Right.
To ensure that someone's there, the buddy system, if you will. I think the next most direct way would be to consider limiting the size or the hours of the operation to perhaps lessen the number of employees that would be required, or to limit the number of products that would attract a certain number of customers.
Yeah. Well, and again, just to state it a little bit differently, I mean, so the notion of 6 vehicles parking in the community at any given time for the staff there is, I could see where that could be problematic. And so just trying to work through that.
Commissioner Big Stick.
Just want to go back to that point one more time. If I were capable of going back in time and reverse engineering the way this law all came down, I would think it would be much easier to find a place to rent in other spaces. But because of the federal versus state question and the way we are pioneers, apparently, in how this is going forward, in parking, we call it a practical difficulty. In the same vein, there's a practical difficulty in finding a place in any of the other overlay districts to put a business. And while I'm not suggesting it's a good idea to entice youth to be using cannabis, I think that if you look at the proximity of Sunset Ridge to, say, the Fairmont Shopping Center, for a substance that I might argue is more pernicious, it's a lot easier for youth to get a hold of it. As somebody who works in the grocery industry, unfortunately, I can tell you that our safety protocols are far more lax than the ones that are being offered for this business, and the results absolutely can speak to that. And so, given that I don't necessarily believe in the stigma that some are attaching to this substance on the one hand, and on the other hand, a substance that I think probably should be stigmatized a little bit more. It's kind of real easy to get a hold of by just walking in by anyone, anytime. I don't see a problem from that angle voting for this business, because I think at the end of the day, again, it's setting up a model of regulation that undercuts black market, where there's much more of a risk to children than this business is presenting.
The only thing I'll add is that the market forces might speak to who survives in this district. If there's 3, and the neighborhood can't support the 3, so we'll find out.
Well, if we're the only city in San Mateo County right now with retail cannabis, I mean, I think all 3 should do quite well. They've probably done their research on that, but that might change. You're right. Well, parking, I think, I don't know. I think parking is an issue, and I do think that there's, the cannabis ordinance does say the proposed location of the cannabis operation shouldn't likely have a potential adverse effect on the health, peace, or safety of persons due to the cannabis operation's proposed proximity to a school, daycare center, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if there's a way to fit parking in there as a hook, but I think definitely there's a need for more parking.
Commissioner Niblin?
Well, just thinking through some of the guidance that staff has provided us, some of the ideas that staff had kicked around, perhaps one way of perhaps approaching this, recognizing that we've already got a plan that's been offered, would be to perhaps limit the number of employees to maybe to 5 or 4, or perhaps tweak the hours a little bit such that when people are getting home from work, they're likely to be able to find a parking space. So that maybe you've got to close by 7, so that, again, when people are, well, whenever you get home, maybe perhaps people get home earlier than that, but there's a space available for you that isn't being filled by an employee, or some combination of those things. I tend to agree with Commissioner Big Stick. This is a project I'm inclined to support. My concerns, again, are parking specific at this point.
Do the hours of operation kind of factor into that?
I was candidly just looking for ideas on ways that we might mitigate in some way the parking impacts. And frankly, I know it's a little out of the ordinary at this point, but I'd be very interested, I think, perhaps in maybe a motion to open the public hearing to reopen the public hearing to the extent that maybe we could hear from the applicant as to whether or not they'd be prepared to do anything like what I'm proposing, or maybe have some other idea that would address this commission's concern around parking.
Commissioner.
So I appreciate the thought of trying to find a compromise. I think the store hours could be applicable. That could be a good solution, especially with concerns of just who's walking by. And running a shop later at night is kind of, in my head, similar to maybe like a 7-Eleven or, you know, a place where you could buy alcohol or another substance, which cannabis is similar to. I don't believe, or I'm not in favor of reducing the number of employees, just given kind of the applicant's original statement. It sounds like they for one want a good amount of employees to serve their business, which I appreciate, especially given the lobby area where people wait until they're able to be served. And also, more employees gives the opportunity for more security, which I'm in favor for as well. I think the parking obviously is a concern here, and I think it's one thing to kind of allow an owner, a property owner, to have more parking for their home, because, I mean, my home, my husband and I, we do live up to the fault of parking in our driveway. But the burden of a third cannabis shop in a small area of proximity to other shops also, I wouldn't say concerns me, it just doesn't seem appropriate. And I do recall that we were debating months ago when the cannabis municipal code changes came in front of us. I think a lot of situations we were wondering if there were too many, and not only for the Sharp Park area. So currently, although I acknowledge that given the school is just outside of the 600-foot radius, and there's many ways that this complies, I'm still very hesitant to vote yes. But I would love to hear from the applicant again as well.
Commissioner Niblin?
Yeah, I guess one of the things I did want to note, just because the thought occurs to me, I mean, there's a requirement that there be a certain number of parking spaces, and it doesn't actually, I mean, in some sense, the business owners have obviously got a business interest in making sure that parking is available for customers, but there really isn't anything in the law, as far as I can understand anyway, that would prevent them from allowing their customers, or I'm sorry, their own employees to park in those spaces. In fact, it's in some sense, both a business imperative, but also sort of a notion of, it's a business imperative, actually having those spaces available. There's and the other thought that occurs to me is that we, you know, again, the ordinance does provide for 3 licenses in this overlay district. And you've kind of got a situation where you've got kind of the last to the punch, so to speak. And these came in, you know, whatever order they came in. I guess it had to do with lotteries and who had applications completed at a particular time. But in some sense, the last to the, I guess the last of the deal has got to deal with the fact that you had 2 ahead of you who, frankly, have created the impacts that they have. So I'm a little concerned about sort of this notion of differential treatment of the last to arrive, and that kind of, I guess, maybe just in the nature of life isn't always fair, but I want to make sure that it isn't unfair in a way that, you know, creates due process issues. So just another thought that occurs to me. Again, I would continue to be interested in hearing what the applicant might have to say about the concerns that we've been articulating here.
I mean, I think I'd be interested in regulating the hours of operation to help mitigate some of the concerns about whether there are kids in the morning, you know, going past an operational business, or potentially parking issues where employees are not parking earlier in the day. I don't think we can regulate the number of employees. I think that all of that will be sussed out by the market anyway, how many employees they need for their business.
I'm not actually one way or the other suggesting one or the other is a better way to go. I tend to be a little less concerned about, folk walking by. It sounds like people can't really even sort of see inside when you get right down to it. So the aesthetics aspects of it I'm less concerned about. But
So what is it that you're asking?
I would, again, I'll repeat what I think I'd like. If the rest of the commission's in favor, I'd like to hear from the applicants as to whether or not, in light of the conversation that's been taking place here, they have ideas on ways that they might address concerns specific to parking.
I'd be in favor of the parking or hours if they're going to consider that as well and reopening the public comment. Either way, I like the hours notion, gently pushing back on staff and some commissioners on the notion that proximity, the kids walking by, there's no direct harm. The city did pass a 500 or 600-foot buffer for a reason, and so I think we should be respectful of that reason. I think there is some sense from the city council that proximity to schools is not something that's favored in this community. In most communities, or many communities, have a 1,000-foot buffer, and I know we talked a lot about that, which would have obviated this one. But there is a city stance on proximity to schools. I think we should remember that.
I just don't see how the applicant can speak to parking. They have parking spots they could reserve for employees. Those spots would then be taken by customers or vice versa.
Again, I think what I was sort of thinking was it was possible the applicant, in light of having heard these conversations, might have some ideas on ways that the operations could be adjusted, ways that they might deal with, I don't know, maybe they'd agree to carpooling, maybe they'd agree to ensuring that their employees, they'd get parking off-site somewhere else that they, somehow or another lease from someone else. I don't know. The solutions are only limited by the creativity of folks who were brought to bear
As we've established, there is a bus line.
Well, I'd be inclined to invite them back up just to speak to parking and maybe hours of operations for a few minutes.
Well, all this, in my view, is a focus on parking, whether it's hours of operation was just a way to address a parking concern.
Okay. If the applicant wants to come back up, we'll have 5 minutes to talk.
So in respects to parking, we have 5 parking spots, which we were only required 4, so we actually have more parking than any other dispensary in Pacifica. As far as employee parking, we do have the delivery driveway on the right side of the building. We could fit probably 2 additional employee vehicles on the side there, as well as a delivery vehicle. So again, we have 1 extra parking spot that is required by the city, as well as, again, we can fit probably 2 employees on the delivery driveway as well.
Can I ask one quick question?
Go for it.
One quick question. I just want to confirm the staffing that you anticipate at any given time throughout the course of a day. Could you just sort of give me confirm what that is?
We were initially anticipating about 6 staff members. We'd be happy to limit that. I'm unsure of what Lit or Seaweed or any of the others currently have, but we'd be happy to take a look at what they're using currently and utilize that staff. Really, our purpose was to ensure that we were having the highest security standards. And what I'm hearing from all of you is, we like security, but we like parking. And so we're trying to find a balance. And so we have a rigorous security plan, and we offer, before we even add additional parking spots, we have more parking spots than any of the other dispensaries. And what we're telling you is that we can add 3 more to that. So it really, we're trying to ameliorate all of your concerns the best way we possibly can. So I think we've met all of the requirements in terms of the law, the buffer zone, security, front facade, every single one of the requirements, we've knocked them out of the park by either meeting or exceeding them.
Could I just repeat back what I think I heard stated, is that we know that 4 are required. There are 5 spaces that we've just been talking about. You've got a delivery space in the back where you've got your delivery truck, and you're suggesting that you could fit 2 more vehicles back there, perhaps 2 employee vehicles.
Correct.
For example. Okay, thank you.
Should we ask about operational hours?
Yeah, go for it.
I know you mentioned operating between 9 a.m., 9 p.m. I guess back to the commission, what are hours that maybe, I guess Commissioner Nieblin, might you have an idea to propose?
Well, I really was more concerned again about hours of operation as it pertained to impacts on parking. And I was really sort of, again, speculating or hypothesizing that situation where I'm driving home at 7 o'clock and I want to find a place to park, and there are 6 vehicles from outside the neighborhood that belong to employees, therefore I can't find a parking space. If hours knocked off at 7, then those vehicles wouldn't be there anymore. So that was my logic for hours of operation. I frankly don't have any, at this juncture, any concerns about the 9 to 9 as a general operational matter. That's what every other dispensary in the city has at this point. We'd had a lot of conversations in prior meetings about the appropriate hours, and 9 to 9 was what was arrived at. I would have frankly preferred they be shorter, but that's kind of where we are now. And so just standing in the abstract, I don't have any concerns about the hours. It was really how the hours might impact parking. I was very heartened to hear about the possibility of adding a couple of parking spaces. That's not something that, if it was in the report, I apologize, I just didn't see it. But frankly, that goes a long way toward addressing my concerns.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question on the parking?
Yeah, go for it, please.
Is that in the driveway at all for the garage that Jose Barba's going to be using?
No, this is on the
opposite side.
existing driveway that's on the right side of the building. That we deemed the delivery driveway with the gate. There's enough room to have the delivery vehicle as well as 2 additional vehicles behind it.
Okay.
And with the 4 spots in the back by the garage, and then the 1 ADA stall in the front.
And the 4 spots in the back by the garage don't block Jose Barba from getting into his garage?
No, they won't.
All right.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Chair, if I could just offer for the commission's consideration the hours that have been approved for the other authorized cannabis retail operations. So they have been ranging from a 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. start for all of the operations. 3 of them 10 a.m., 2 of them 9 a.m. In the end times, 3 of them are 8 p.m., 1 is 9 p.m., and 1 is 6 p.m. And the one that's limited to 6 p.m. for the retail storefront is authorized to conduct deliveries as late as 8 p.m. And the conditions of approval that we have imposed on hours of operation have limited the customer hours to those hours, but have authorized store staff to remain beyond those hours for typical retail storekeeping activities like inventory, bookkeeping, training, et cetera. So we would need to retool that condition of approval if there was a desire to limit the hours that employees could be on site, if that's the nature of the concern for the commission.
I have no desire to limit the hours, actually, for this applicant.
I would limit the hours.
To what?
I think 9 a.m. is fine. Kids are in school. I would limit the hour, though. Just I still have concerns about parking and kids coming home from practice, cross country, track, taking the bus. You know, in my perfect world, I would cap it at 3. But I know that's,
Are you of a mind not to vote in favor of the application anyway?
yeah.
Okay.
Well,
For me, I mean, parking is a concern, but it's not of my greatest concern. So I'd be interested to see if others have a proposal.
Well, I want to apologize. I get misrecalled what the hours of operation are. I'm not in principle opposed to shorter hours of operation. It sounds like 8 is kind of if you look at kind of the critical mass of where the hours of operation are kind of knocking off, it's probably in that range. And I do think it would probably have some beneficial effect on parking, again, if the business were to cease operation at 8 and if folks were to be kind of out at some point, not too long thereafter. I would, again, be in favor of, myself, I would be inclined to make a motion to approve the application, it being understood that the 2 additional spaces that we were talking about would have to be provided. and with hours of operation that end at 8.
Does that include delivery or is just in-store hours?
I think delivery would have to be at the same time, just to, again, I'm tying it in my own mind to the availability of parking. I do think that's a community kind of health and welfare and sort of quality of life sort of concern that needs to be addressed. So that's the direction I'd be prepared to go, and I'd be in favor of a motion like that.
Any other comments on that? Commissioner Niblin.
Well, I guess I would ask that we close the public hearing again.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much for your time. Do we have to? If there's anybody in the public that would like to speak one last time, you can. Nobody's. Oh, Mr. McCarthy.
I think we want to limit it to the same matter of discussion we were talking
Yeah, we're going to limit it to the same matter of discussion, hours and parking, and you have 3 minutes, please.
Okay, good. I have no concerns with the hours. Parking I still have a concern with. One of the subjects I brought up earlier was about traffic flow, and certainly they said that they'll have their security guard looking at the parking lot. I've had some conversations with some of the guys, general managers from some of the clubs that are over in Oakland as well as over in San Jose. And I just was asking them about security and how they manage their neighborhoods. Certainly the one I've seen in San Jose, they have a very big security force in front of their locations. And so they're certainly concerned with the parking on the premises, but I also see them directing traffic to make sure that people are flowing in the right way. And so we're going to be, as you know, we're very young in how we're doing this, but we're going to have a lot of people coming in from out of town. And they're all one-way streets in our neighborhood. And as I mentioned before, I had people driving, when I had stir-fry at the end of our street, people were driving the wrong way. We made several calls to the police. It's very difficult to enforce unless somebody's there at that time. People are unfamiliar. They're doing U-turns in the middle of the street. There are children playing in the street. There's a lot more youth in my neighborhood right now. So I am concerned that the security plan is limited in scope to what's going on inside, as well as only on the parking lot itself. And I would like to see it a little more outward towards the community to make sure that they're helping to flow traffic in the right direction and create a safe environment for everybody in the community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bringing it back again to the commission for final deliberations. Commissioner Big Stick.
So I am somebody whom has absolutely driven down the wrong way. I've lived in Pacifica my entire life. I was visiting a friend. I thought to myself, yes, that is a one-way street in the right direction. And I turned, and suddenly there's a car passing me who's really pissed off because I made an unfortunate decision. My brain was asleep. I didn't see the sign, and I was wrong in the way I turned. I was not under the influence of any substance. Whether or not I was a little bit sleepy in that moment, I couldn't tell you. It might have been after work, but for all intents and purposes, my brain was functioning fully in the way a brain probably should be, aside from the fact I did not see that sign. So my question for staff is, might it be possible to put a condition of approval in that we have the applicant just do like one of those paintings on down Santa Maria, one-way street? Some places, they put it on the street, it's painted one way. That way, if you don't catch the sign, you're probably going to catch the street as you're driving down it. Could that be a condition of approval we put in to make it a little bit clearer, especially to people who are new to our town, that that is a one-way street?
So do we still have an engineer here?
I don't see it, no.
Okay, we did have an engineer here, but typically we don't condition applicants to do that kind of right-of-way improvement, signage, where it is located, to make sure it's not confusing, is very much kind of an art as far as traffic engineers are concerned. I think that it would be appropriate for, we can certainly bring this comment to our Public Works Department for their consideration.
Whatever's doable would be helpful. I remember from another thing brought before the body that there was a legal ramification if we just go ahead without taking all the steps. So if it's possible to make it clear that's one way, I think that would be in the best interest of the public safety.
Commissioner Niblin?
I think that was my light left over.
Oh, sorry.
I have a light.
Sure.
Is there any public benefit fee associated with this project, or any community in lieu fees that maybe part of that could go towards some more wayfinding signage or pavement marking?
So we've not identified any relevant impacts which ought to be mitigated by these applications, which would justify imposition of a fee. These do generate cannabis operations tax, and so the city council has full discretion to apportion that tax in whatever way it likes for public benefits or other purposes, so that is something the council could consider. But as far as fees, there's nothing related to these other than their annual licensing fees.
Okay, thank you. It's worth the question.
No other questions? Would anybody like to make a motion? Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll make a motion then. I'll move that the Planning Commission finds the project is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, approves Cannabis Activity Permit CAP 1118 by adopting the resolution included as Attachment A to the staff report, including conditions of approval in Exhibit A to the resolution, and incorporates all maps, the applicant's CAP application, and all attachments and testimony into the record by reference, subject to the condition that the 2 additional spaces that we discussed this evening that I guess are available in the driveway, the delivery driveway, I think is what it was referred to, are made available. I had earlier talked about the proposition of making adjustment to the, or in the conditions to the hours of operation, but I've actually heard from at least one commissioner and a member of the community that the hours of operation aren't of utmost concern, and they really weren't, except insofar as they might bear on parking. So I'm not going to, in my motion, include any change to the hours of operation. But that's my motion.
Through the chair, I have some recommended language for the additional condition.
Please.
That the applicant shall provide 2 additional employee parking spaces behind the business accessed via the north driveway, exclusive of the delivery vehicle and ADA parking spaces.
Okay, that is consistent with what we were just discussing. That is my motion then.
Chuck, there you're lucky to get 1 space.
If feasible.
If feasible.
Determined by the planning director. We have not had a chance to evaluate this proposal, and so we don't know if the dimensions are even sufficient for 1 space. It looks as though perhaps 1 space could be accommodated, but we're just hesitant to impose a condition that may be impossible to comply with.
I see. Well, I feel pretty strongly about the additional parking, and strongly enough that it might bear on my, wanting to make the motion. So the if feasible is a little bit.
We're limited to 1 spot?
Might I propose, perhaps, is it something that to give the planning department, to give staff and the applicant an opportunity to address the concern?
So there appears to be a lot of room on the lot. It may not be feasible if they're all accessed through the north driveway.
Yeah.
And so to maybe remove the access so that they can utilize all of the space that they have available to them. I know they need to talk
Right.
to their property owner about his access to the garage.
Right. I see where you're going. I really am less wedded to where exactly it is than the notion there would be those two employee spaces. So maybe if the condition were working in sort of concert with the planning director to identify 2 additional spaces somewhere on the site for employee parking, or words to that effect.
Would it make sense to continue the hearing to?
Well, I want to make my motion along the lines I just suggested. I don't feel a need to continue if, in fact, but that would be the condition of approval, that 2 additional spaces be identified somewhere on site for employee parking.
I'd be in favor of a motion to continue, just throwing it out there.
I'd be in favor for continuance.
Well, that's not my motion. If somebody wants to move to continue, that's fine.
Commissioner Campbell?
I'll move to continue this item.
Now, my motion was made, so I guess somebody, I'd take it that, we could call for a second, and if I don't get a second, then the motion would be.
Yeah, that's right. So the motion again is for, can you repeat the motion?
The motion is as read to include basically the blurb that we have here in the packet, in addition, a requirement that 2 spaces be identified on site for employee parking.
Is there a second? Commissioner Bigsick?
I will second.
Okay, please vote.
Passes.
Okay. Congratulations, you have an approved project. Passes.
Make sure you read the appeal language.
Oh, yeah. Anyone aggrieved by the action of the Planning Commission has 10 calendar days to appeal the decision in writing to the City Council. If any of the above actions are challenged in court, issues which may be raised are limited to those raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. Next up is communications, commission communications. Mr. Bigsick.
Sure, I served as liaison at the September 23rd City Council meeting regarding the appeal to the 7-Eleven business up in Fairmont. I actually was asked a question this time, so I had the opportunity to speak briefly. It's not always the case. The council did decide to deny the appeal. 7-Eleven will continue on until we at least get to review them next year.
Anybody else? Okay, so.
Oh, I had a quick question, just because I'm getting just lots of questions. Surf spot. When's the opening?
So it is very, very close. So they have already started to talk to staff about scheduling their final inspections very soon. So I think within the next couple months.
What's the
they should be
business?
opening. New restaurant and brewery.
Oh, good. And keeping the outdoor concept, everything?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's known as the Pacifica Brewery, the surf spots, no more. New business
Pacifica Brewery,
operator.
very creative name.
Also, I got the mic, I want to say special thanks to the police chief for coming again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, staff communications?
Sure, I have several. So I wanted to let you know that this last Monday, the City Council took additional input on the draft LCP and authorized city staff to transmit the document to Coastal Commission for comment. So I wanted to thank the Planning Commission for your preparation and participation in the study sessions. That was a great help. I wanted to let you all know that we have several applications that are significant or, could be significant. So on Higgins, this is the west side, so it's between the apartment building and the Shamrock Ranch. There's an application for 18 residences, and each would have an ADU. The current proposal. These are very new, so we haven't really had a chance to review them in great detail. On the north end of Palmetto, the east side of the street, the site known as the Bowl, we have a condo development that's proposed, 29 townhomes. And then on Pedro Point, on Danman, there's a mixed-use project that's proposed, 6 units above commercial space. So I also wanted to give you an update on some of the other things that the department's working on. So we're still doing library outreach, and we'll be giving an update to the city council either the end of October or their first meeting in November. We're working on the tri-annual building code update, and we're directed to also include reach codes to kind of reach beyond the minimum in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the community. So we're working on a proposal that we will recommend for adoption. In kind of the housing world, we are working on our SB2 planning grant application. We'll have to take the application to City Council for authorization to submit in November. We have been selected, the city has been selected to participate in the county's one-stop shop pilot program for accessory dwelling units. So we have funding to assist up to 4 projects, ADU projects, with technical assistance through the development process. Part of the feedback we received during the Home for All outreach is that ADUs were very much kind of interest in the community and supported in the community, but that they also felt like they needed more help through the permitting process. So we were grateful. We have a match in funding to have that program from the county. We're also going to attend the ADU fair this weekend, which I think is in Redwood City. We may not have too many residents go there, but we're going to be there regardless. We are also working on PDA applications, which are due soon, participating in pre-RENA activities, and working on early contracts to help develop a proposal for affordable housing impact fees, which is on our council work plan this year. So there's a lot going on. It's been a while since I came to you guys with an item with a more of a comprehensive update with, for the department. So I intend to do that in the near future. You'll hear more detail about everything going on in the department soon.
A question?
Yeah, go for it.
Any new development on meeting with the Coastal Commission regarding determining historical zoning at the Carlson property?
I think the city council resolved that by recommending a land use designation for the Carlson site, which is appropriate and if certified, which would have implementing zoning.
Take that as a no.
Another question. Given that a lot of the items that come before us recently, a constant concern is parking. I know we just finished several study sessions for the general plan, but is there any, I don't know if it's educational or what, incorporating it into the municipal code, I'm not sure, but something to help address parking in areas such as Sharp Park and Palmetto? I mean, me personally, I do work in a city that has a lot of easy public transit, so their specific plans and precise plans try to minimize parking, but we're such an isolated city with kind of limited public transit, and our bike networks aren't all connected yet. So I hate to say this because it's not quite environmentally friendly, but increasing parking in certain areas, parking requirements.
Right, so the answer to that severalfold. So first of all, the Sharp Park specific plan does include a deliverable, or, in the contract to do a parking study for the Sharp Park area, and to assist, kind of the first step in preparing a parking district for this area so that the city can collect fees and also construct parking areas for the public to use. And then I would say that our parking ordinance is fairly old and outdated, and so I agree that as we're working through updating these comprehensive planning documents, the next step is zoning updates, and we certainly need to include our parking ordinance.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to be involved with that if we could do study sessions in the future.
All right. It's about that time. Make a motion to adjourn.
I will make this motion to adjourn.
Okay, I will second. Please vote. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ugh.